This happened in the 1980s, 1983 to be exact. When you're the kind of guy who spends most of his time walking the trails and making sure tourists don't get lost, you start to think you've seen it all. Weird hikers, wildlife that gets a little too close, and even the occasional illegal camper hiding out in the woods. My name's Frank Hawkins, and I've been a forest ranger at Redwood National Park since '75. I'm not some backwoods survivalist or anything, but I know how to handle myself out here. Or at least I thought I did. It was late September when things took a turn. I only remember the exact date because I'd just gotten back from a fishing trip with my older brother, and we'd spent the whole time making bets about who'd catch the biggest salmon. He's always been the outdoorsy one, not me. It's a joke in the family. They say, how does Frank get by watching trees grow all day? But I like it. Quiet job, less hassle. That particular day, September 28th, I was called in to do a routine check on the Tall Trees Trail. We'd had reports of a couple of hikers who hadn't come back to the visitor center when they were supposed to. Their friends said they were fine, probably just lost track of time, but I'd been around long enough to know that kind of confidence in the woods is what gets people in trouble. I remember the call like it was yesterday. It was just past noon and I was finishing up some paperwork in the ranger station when the phone rang. It was Judy, one of our dispatch operators. "Frank," she said, her voice tight with worry. "We've got a situation. 2 hikers, Mike Brennan and Tom Schultz, both in their mid-20s, haven't checked in. They were supposed to be back by 10 a.m. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 12:30 p.m. A knot formed in my stomach. 2.5 hours wasn't a huge delay, but in these woods, every minute counted. "Any contact with them at all?" I asked, already reaching for my gear. "Nothing since yesterday evening," Judy replied. "Their campsite was registered near Tall Trees Grove. They were supposed to hike out this morning." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "All right, I'm on it. I'll head out to the trailhead and work my way in. Keep me posted if you hear anything." "Will do, Frank. Be careful out there." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Judy's voice had wavered, or maybe it was just instinct after years on the job. Whatever it was, it made me double-check my pack before heading out. I threw in extra water, some high-energy snacks, a first aid kit, and a heavy-duty flashlight. As an afterthought, I grabbed the old .38 revolver from the locked cabinet. We weren't supposed to carry firearms on routine checks, but something told me I might need it. The drive to the trailhead was uneventful, just the usual winding roads through the towering redwoods. But as I parked the ranger truck and stepped out, that feeling of unease grew stronger. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I radioed in to let Judy know I was starting my search, then set off down the trail. The Tall Trees Trail isn't particularly long, only about 3.5 miles round trip, but it winds through some of the densest, oldest parts of the forest. The redwoods here are ancient, some over 1,000 years old, their massive trunks disappearing into the canopy hundreds of feet above. Under normal circumstances, I love this trail. There's something awe-inspiring about walking among living things that have stood silent witness to centuries of history. But today, the shadows seemed deeper, the silence more pronounced. About a mile in, I realized just how quiet it was. You get used to the sounds of nature after a while. Wind rustling the trees, birds chirping, squirrels rummaging through the underbrush. But this time it was dead silent, and not the peaceful kind of quiet either. It was the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched. Now, I've dealt with mountain lions before, even saw a black bear once, but this didn't feel like either of those. Predators don't make everything else stop. They're just part of the landscape. Whatever it was, though, I kept going. Had a job to do, after all. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around me. The trail, usually well-maintained, was overgrown in places, as if nature was trying to reclaim it. I found myself having to push through ferns and step over fallen branches more often than usual. That's when I spotted the first sign of trouble. About 2 miles in, just off the main trail, I found their campsite, or what was left of it. The tent was half collapsed, definitely not how experienced hikers would leave it. It was a good quality tent too, the kind serious backpackers use. But now it was a mess, the fabric torn in places, one of the poles snapped clean through. As I approached, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right here. This wasn't just a case of campers leaving in a hurry. This looked like, Well, I wasn't sure what it looked like, but it sent a chill down my spine. I moved closer, my hand instinctively going to the revolver on my hip. The campsite was a disaster. Scattered gear, some shredded clothes, and a couple of old food wrappers were strewn around like someone, or something, had torn through the place in a frenzy. "Mike? Tom?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness of the forest. No response. I knelt down to examine the ground around the tent. That's when I saw them. Footprints. But not human footprints. These were different. Larger than any boot print I'd ever seen, with a strange, elongated shape. 5 toes, but spread wide, almost like a hand. And the depth of the impressions, whatever made these was heavy, much heavier than a person. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A bear, maybe? But bears don't have feet like this, and the pattern was all wrong. These prints didn't move like a 4-legged animal. They were spaced like something that walked on 2 legs, but with a gait much longer than any human's. I stood up, my eyes scanning the surrounding trees. Nothing moved. Not even a leaf stirred in the oppressive stillness. I keyed my radio, hoping to get through to Judy back at the station. Nothing but static. Coverage gets spotty out here, but usually we can at least get a weak signal. This silence was unusual, and it did nothing to calm my growing unease. Turning back to the campsite, I started to sift through the scattered gear, looking for any clue as to what might have happened. One of the backpacks was relatively intact. I opened it, finding a wallet inside. Mike Brennan, according to the driver's license. 26 years old, from San Francisco. An avid hiker, judging by the well-worn gear. The other pack was in worse shape, torn open down one side. Tom's, I assumed. His belongings were scattered around the clearing. Clothes, a map, a compass, some energy bars, but no sign of Tom himself. As I stood there, trying to piece together what might have happened, a sound broke the silence. A crack like a branch snapping underfoot. It came from deeper in the forest, off the trail. I spun around, my hand going to my revolver. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Ranger Hawkins. Is anyone there?" No response, just more silence. I debated my next move. Protocol said I should head back, report what I'd found, and wait for backup. But Mike and Tom had already been missing for hours. If they were hurt out there, waiting could mean the difference between life and death. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. I'd continue on, following the strange footprints. But first, I needed to leave a message for any search parties that might come after me. I pulled out my notepad and pen, quickly scribbling down what I'd found and where I was heading. I tucked the note into a plastic bag to protect it from the elements, then wedged it securely in a crack in one of the massive redwood trunks near the campsite. With one last look around the destroyed campsite, I set off into the undergrowth, following those bizarre, unsettling footprints. The forest seemed to grow denser as I moved away from the established trail. The redwoods here were older, their massive trunks so wide it would take a dozen people linking hands to encircle them. The canopy far above blocked out most of the sunlight, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. I moved slowly, carefully, my eyes constantly scanning the ground for more of those strange footprints. They were there, leading me deeper into a part of the forest I'd never explored before. This was well off any marked trail, the kind of place even experienced hikers rarely ventured. The silence was broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the occasional snap of a twig under my boots. Every so often I'd stop and listen, straining my ears for any sign of the missing hikers. But there was nothing. No calls for help, no distant voices, just the oppressive silence of the ancient forest. As I pushed through a particularly thick patch of ferns, my foot caught on something. I looked down, expecting to see a root or fallen branch. Instead, I found myself staring at a backpack. Tom's backpack, judging by the torn side I'd seen back at the campsite. My heart rate picked up as I knelt to examine it. The pack was muddy and torn, as if it had been dragged through the underbrush. But what really caught my attention were the marks on the straps. Deep gouges like something with incredibly sharp claws had slashed through the tough nylon. I stood up slowly, my eyes darting around the clearing. That's when I saw it. About 20 feet away, half hidden by the base of a massive redwood, was a shoe. A hiking boot, to be precise. And inside it, I swallowed hard, fighting back a wave of nausea. Inside the boot was a human foot, severed cleanly at the ankle. For a moment, I just stood there, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not in my forest. But the evidence was right there in front of me, undeniable and horrifying. I forced myself to approach, my hand on my revolver. As I got closer, I could see dark stains on the leaves around the boot. Blood. A lot of it. "Oh God," I muttered, the words escaping me before I could stop them. I knelt down, examining the severed foot more closely. The cut was clean, almost surgical in its precision. No animal I knew of could do this. And those claw marks on the backpack. This was something else entirely. A twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, drawing my revolver in one smooth motion. My eyes scanned the trees, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing, but I could feel it now, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I was being watched. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is Ranger Hawkins. If you can hear me, I'm here to help." Silence. Then from somewhere to my left, a sound. A low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion. It was something else. I turned slowly toward the sound, my revolver raised. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift and move, playing tricks on my eyes. Was that a figure standing there, or just my imagination? Another growl, closer this time, and with it, a smell. A horrific, overwhelming stench of decay and something else, something alien and wrong. My training kicked in, overriding the fear that threatened to paralyze me. I started to back away slowly, keeping my eyes on the spot where I'd heard the growl. Whatever was out there, I wasn't equipped to handle it alone. That's when I saw it, just for a moment as I was backing up. A flash of pale, almost translucent skin, a glimpse of a limb that was too long, too thin to be human, and eyes. God, those eyes. Glowing in the shadows, fixed on me with an intelligence that sent ice through my veins. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but in that moment every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. Behind me I could hear it moving. Not running, not crashing through the forest like I was. No, this was different. A smooth, sliding sound, punctuated by the crack of breaking branches, like something was pulling itself through the trees with incredible speed. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every ounce of my being was focused on getting back to the trail, back to my truck, back to safety. As I ran, my mind raced. What was that thing? How long had it been out here? And Mike and Tom? God, were they already? I burst out of the undergrowth onto the main trail, nearly falling as I stumbled over a root. I caught myself on a tree trunk, my hand scraping against the rough bark. For a moment I paused, gasping for breath, listening. Silence. No sound of pursuit? Had I lost it? Or was it still out there, watching, waiting? I didn't want to find out. I turned and started jogging down the trail back toward the trailhead. I needed to get back, to report what I'd found, to warn people about what was out here in these woods. As I ran, the shadows seemed to deepen around me. The massive redwoods, usually so comforting in their ancient majesty, now felt oppressive, like silent sentinels, watching my desperate flight with indifference. I was about halfway back to the trailhead when I heard it again, that growl. Closer now, much closer. And this time it was in front of me. I skidded to a stop, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Slowly I raised my revolver, pointing it down the trail. There, in the shadows between two massive redwoods, something moved. Something big. I caught a glimpse of pale skin, of limbs too long and thin to be natural, and then it stepped out onto the trail. Now, I've spent most of my adult life in these woods. I've seen things that would make most city folks run screaming, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw that day. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, but hunched over like it was dragging itself along. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over a frame that was all angles and sharp edges. Its limbs were too long for its body, ending in hands, if you could call them that, with fingers that curved inward, ending in wicked, knife-like claws. But its face, God, its face. Where there should have been eyes, there were just deep, dark hollows. Its mouth was a gaping maw lined with row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. For a moment we just stood there, staring at each other. Me with my pathetic little revolver that suddenly felt about as useful as a toy. And it, studying me with those eyeless sockets, its head cocked to one side like a curious dog. Then it moved, faster than anything I've ever seen. One moment it was standing there, the next it was right in front of me, one long-fingered hand reaching for my face. I fired. The sound of the revolver was deafening in the quiet forest. The thing jerked back, a high-pitched shriek escaping its lipless mouth. Dark viscous fluid oozed from a wound in its chest. I didn't wait to see if I'd hurt it badly. I turned and ran, harder than I've ever run in my life. Behind me, I could hear it coming, that sliding, scraping sound as it pulled itself after me with terrifying speed. The trailhead seemed impossibly far away. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. I could feel it right behind me, could smell that horrific stench of decay. And then, suddenly, I was out. The trees thinned, and I burst into the parking lot. My truck was there, right where I'd left it. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the lock. As I yanked open the truck door, I risked a glance back. The thing was there, at the edge of the trees. It stood motionless, those empty eye sockets fixed on me. For a moment, I thought it might come after me, might charge across the open parking lot. But it didn't. It just stood there watching. And then slowly, it melted back into the shadows of the forest. I climbed into the truck, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I nearly cried with relief. I peeled out of that parking lot like the hounds of hell were after me. In a way, I guess they were. The drive back to the ranger station was a blur. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to make sense of it. But there was no making sense of that thing. It defied everything I thought I knew about the natural world. When I pulled up to the station, Judy was waiting outside. The look on her face told me she knew something was wrong. "Frank, what happened out there?" she asked as I stumbled out of the truck. I must have looked a sight. My clothes were torn and dirty, my face scratched from branches, and my eyes, well, I can only imagine what she saw in my eyes. "We need to call in everyone," I said, my voice hoarse. "There's something out there, Judy. Something not natural." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but she knew me well enough to know I wouldn't say something like that lightly. "Come inside," she said, taking my arm. "You need to sit down and tell me everything." The next few hours were a whirlwind. I told my story to Judy, then to the park superintendent when he arrived, then to the local sheriff and his deputies. Each time I could see the disbelief in their eyes. Hell, I could hardly believe it myself. But the evidence was there. The destroyed campsite, the strange footprints, and, God, that severed foot in the boot. We sent out search parties, of course, but I knew deep down that we wouldn't find Mike or Tom. Not alive anyway. As night fell, more rangers arrived from neighboring districts. The park was closed to visitors, and we set up a command center in the main office. Maps were spread out on tables, areas marked off for systematic searches. I should have been out there leading one of the search teams, but the superintendent had taken one look at me and ordered me to stay put. "You've been through enough, Frank," he'd said. "Let the others handle this." So I sat in the office answering questions, pointing out on the map where I'd seen it, where I'd found the campsite, the backpack, the boot. All the while, my mind kept drifting back to those woods, to that thing standing at the edge of the trees, watching me drive away. It was well past midnight when one of the search teams radioed in. They'd found something. Not Mike or Tom, but evidence. They wouldn't say more over the radio. When they brought it in, I understood why. It was a piece of that thing, a long, pale, almost translucent finger, ending in a wickedly sharp claw. It had been cut off cleanly, probably by my gunshot. The room fell silent as we all stared at it. It was undeniably real, undeniably not human, not animal, not anything we could explain. "What the hell is this, Hawkins?" the sheriff asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know. I really don't know." The finger was bagged and sent off for analysis. Not that I expected any lab to be able to identify it. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't from any world of science I knew. As dawn broke, we were no closer to finding Mike and Tom. The search parties had combed miles of forest, finding nothing but more of those strange footprints. And in one area, deep in the woods, they'd found trees with deep claw marks, 8 feet off the ground. The official story, when it finally came down, was that the 2 hikers had been attacked by an animal. Probably a bear, they said. The strange footprints, just distorted by rain and time, the claw marks on the trees, an unusually large bear marking its territory. And that finger? Well, that was never mentioned in any official report. I knew better, of course. We all did, those of us who'd been there that night. But what could we say? That there was some kind of monster living in the Redwood National Park? That it had killed 2 hikers and nearly got a park ranger? No, the truth was too fantastic, too terrifying. So we kept quiet. The park reopened after a week. Tourists came back, hiking the same trails, camping in the same spots where Mike and Tom had disappeared. But things were different now, at least for those of us who knew. We went out in pairs, always armed. We warned hikers to be back before dark, to stay on the marked trails. And we watched. Always watched. As for me, well, I stayed on as a ranger. Someone had to, someone who knew what was really out there. But I never went back to that part of the forest. Never hiked the tall trees trail again. Sometimes late at night I think I can hear it. That low, guttural growl. The sound of branches breaking as something large moves through the trees. But I tell myself it's just my imagination. Just the wind in the redwoods or a far-off animal. But deep down I know the truth. I know that somewhere out there in the ancient, towering redwoods, something waits. Something watches. Something that doesn't belong in this world, but is here all the same. And sometimes when the fog rolls in thick and the shadows grow long, I wonder, how long has it been here hiding in these woods? And more importantly, is it the only one? In the weeks that followed, a sort of uneasy normalcy settled over the park. On the surface, everything went back to business as usual. Tourists came and went, hikers explored the trails, and we rangers went about our daily routines. But underneath it all, there was a current of tension, a constant vigilance that hadn't been there before. The official investigation into Mike and Tom's disappearance continued, but it was clear from the start that it was more about going through the motions than actually finding answers. The local authorities, along with the Park Service, seemed determined to stick to their animal attack story, no matter how many holes we poked in it. I was called in for multiple interviews, each one more frustrating than the last. They wanted me to change my story, to say I'd seen a bear, or maybe a mountain lion. Anything but what I'd actually witnessed. "Come on, Frank," one of the investigators said during a particularly heated session. "You know as well as I do that there's no such thing as monsters. You were tired, it was getting dark. Your mind played tricks on you." I stood up, slamming my hands on the table. "Damn it, Jim, I know what I saw. That thing wasn't any animal. And what about that finger? You can't tell me that came from any bear." Jim, a Park Service investigator I'd known for years, just shook his head. The finger was inconclusive. Could have been from any number of animals, maybe a primate that escaped from a lab or a private collection, but there's no such thing as monsters, Frank. You need to accept that. But I couldn't accept it. None of us who'd been there that night could. We knew the truth, even if no one would believe us. As the official investigation wound down, a few of us decided to conduct our own, off the books. Me, Judy from dispatch, and a couple of other rangers who'd been on the search teams. We'd meet after hours, poring over maps, comparing notes, trying to piece together what had really happened. We started by retracing my steps from that day. Judy and I hiked out to the Tall Trees Trail, following the path I'd taken. The campsite had been cleared away, of course, any evidence long since bagged and tagged. But the forest itself seemed different now. The trees, once majestic and awe-inspiring, now felt oppressive. Every shadow held potential danger, every rustle of leaves a possible threat. We moved quietly, our eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. When we reached the spot where I'd found the severed foot, Judy gasped. "Oh my God, Frank," she whispered. I mean, seeing it on a map is one thing, but being here..." I nodded, understanding completely. It was one thing to hear about it, to see photos. It was another to stand in that clearing, to see the dark stains still visible on the leaves and undergrowth. We pressed on, following the path I'd taken during my desperate flight. When we reached the spot where I'd first clearly seen the creature, we both stopped short. The trees here were different. Claw marks raked up their massive trunks, some so high up it made my neck hurt to look at them. And the undergrowth? It was like something had thrashed through it repeatedly, leaving a tangled mess of broken ferns and crushed plants. "What could do this, Frank?" Judy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's strong. And big." We spent hours out there, taking photos, making notes. By the time we headed back, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. Neither of us wanted to be out there after dark. Over the next few weeks, we pieced together what we could. We tracked down every report of strange sightings or unexplained phenomena in the park going back years. Most were easily explainable: lost hikers, overactive imaginations. But a few stood out. In 1976, a group of backpackers reported seeing a large, pale figure moving through the trees at night. They'd written it off as a trick of the moonlight. In 1979, a pair of researchers doing a bat survey recorded strange vocalizations that they couldn't identify. The recording had been lost, but their notes described it as a low, guttural growl, unlike any known animal in the region. And in 1981, just 2 years before my encounter, a solo hiker had gone missing on the very same trail where I'd found Mike and Tom's campsite. His body was never found. As we dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. The sightings, the strange occurrences, they all seemed to cluster around one particular area of the park, a remote, rarely visited section that included part of the Tall Trees Trail. "It's like it has a territory," Judy said one night as we pored over our maps. "It stays in this area for the most part, but why? What's special about this section of the forest?" I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's been here a long time, longer than we realized." Our unofficial investigation continued for months. We were careful, always operating under the radar. The last thing we needed was for the higher-ups to catch wind of what we were doing. But despite all our efforts, we were no closer to understanding what that thing was or where it had come from. We had theories, of course. Everything from an undiscovered species to things that belonged more in science fiction than reality. The one thing we were sure of was that it was still out there. Every now and then we'd get reports. A hiker seeing something strange in the twilight. Unusual tracks found deep in the woods, and always in that same area. We did what we could to protect people without raising alarms. We'd routinely close trails for maintenance or wildlife activity. We beefed up our patrols in that section of the park, and we warned people, as much as we could without sounding crazy, to be careful, to stay on the trails, to be out of the woods before dark. For the most part, it worked. There were no more disappearances, no more encounters like the one I'd had. But we all knew it was just a matter of time. Sooner or later, that thing would make another appearance. And when it did, we needed to be ready. It was almost exactly a year after my encounter when it happened again. July 15th, 1984. A date that's burned into my memory as clearly as the day I first saw that thing in the woods. It started like any other summer day in the park. Tourists everywhere, the parking lots full, the trails busy with hikers. I was on my usual patrol, keeping an eye on things, making sure everyone was staying safe and following the rules. Around mid-afternoon, I got a call from Judy at dispatch. "Frank, we've got a situation," she said, her voice tense. "A family of hikers up on Lookout Point. They're reporting. Well, you'd better hear it for yourself." She patched me through to a man whose voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand him. We saw something," he stammered. "Up in the trees, it was... God, I don't know what it was, but it was watching us. My wife, my kids, we need help. Please." I felt my blood run cold. Lookout Point was in that area, that part of the forest where we'd tracked most of the strange occurrences. "Sir, I need you to stay calm," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Are you and your family safe right now?" Yes," he replied. "We're at the lookout station. We ran here after we saw it. But please, you have to believe me. This wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was something else." "I believe you," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Stay where you are. I'm on my way." I radioed Judy back. "Get a team together," I told her. "And Judy, make sure everyone's armed." The drive to Lookout Point was tense. I kept my eyes on the road, but every shadow in the trees seemed to move. Every branch looked like a clawed hand reaching out. When I arrived at the lookout station, I found the family huddled inside. The man who had called, his wife and their 2 kids, a boy and a girl probably no older than 10. They all looked terrified. "I'm Ranger Hawkins," I said as I entered. "Are you all okay? Is anyone hurt?" The woman shook her head. "We're not hurt, just scared, very scared." I nodded, turning to the man. "Can you tell me exactly what you saw?" He took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he ran them through his hair. We were on the trail heading back down. The kids were running ahead a bit. Then we heard this sound. Like, I don't know, like something big moving through the trees. His wife picked up the story. We called the kids back to us. That's when we saw it. Up in the trees, moving from one to another. It was huge. Pale. Like nothing I've ever seen before. The man nodded. It stopped in one of the big redwoods, just watched us. I swear I could feel it looking at us, even though I couldn't see any eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the same thing I'd seen a year ago. "You did the right thing," I told them. "Staying together, getting to safety. A team is on its way. We're going to get you out of here safely." Just then, my radio crackled. It was Judy. "Frank, the team's about 10 minutes out. How's it looking up there?" I stepped outside to respond, my eyes scanning the trees. "Family's shaken up, but okay. No sign of anything unusual. Yet." That's when I heard it. That low, guttural growl. The same sound I'd heard a year ago, the sound that haunted my nightmares. I spun around, my hand going to my revolver there, at the edge of the clearing. A flash of pale skin, a glimpse of a long, thin limb. "Judy," I said into the radio, my voice low and urgent. "Tell the team to hurry, it's here." I backed up slowly towards the lookout station. "Stay inside," I called to the family. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, stay inside." The thing moved then, emerging from the trees with that strange, fluid motion. It was just as I remembered. Tall, pale, with those impossibly long limbs and claws that looked sharp enough to tear through steel. It stood there at the edge of the clearing, its eyeless face turned towards me. Was it the same one I'd encountered before? Had my bullet wounded it, or had it shrugged it off like it was nothing? For a long moment we just stared at each other. Me with my revolver that suddenly felt woefully inadequate, and it studying me, its head tilted to one side in that unsettlingly curious way. Then slowly it began to move towards me. I raised my revolver. "Stop right there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't come any closer." It paused, its head cocking to the other side. Did it understand me? Or was it just reacting to the tone of my voice? I heard a whimper from inside the lookout station. The kids. God, the kids were watching this. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. Its lipless mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. It took another step forward. I fired. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the quiet forest. The bullet hit the thing in the shoulder, causing it to stumble back. Dark, viscous fluid oozed from the wound. For a moment I thought that might be enough to drive it off. But then it straightened up, its mouth opening in a silent snarl, and it charged. I emptied my revolver, each shot finding its mark. But it was like shooting a tank with a pea shooter. The thing just kept coming. I turned to run, to lead it away from the family in the lookout station. But I wasn't fast enough. One of those long-fingered hands grabbed my shoulder, claws digging in deep. I yelled in pain as it yanked me back, spinning me around to face it. Up close, the creature was even more terrifying. Its skin was almost translucent, pulsing with an unnatural internal light. Where its eyes should have been, there were just deep, dark sockets. But somehow I knew it could see me, could see right through me. Its other hand came up, claws spread wide, ready to rake across my face. I closed my eyes, certain that this was the end. Then I heard it. The rumble of engines, shouts, gunshots. The creature's head snapped up, distracted by the new sounds. Its grip on my shoulder loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I stumbled backward, falling to the ground. More gunshots rang out. The creature let out a high-pitched shriek that made my ears hurt. It turned, faster than anything that size should be able to move, and bolted for the trees. I saw Judy and 3 other rangers emerge from the trail, rifles raised. They fired after the fleeing creature, but it was already gone, vanishing into the shadows of the forest. "Frank?" Judy was at my side in an instant, helping me to my feet. "Are you okay? Did it hurt you?" I shook my head, wincing at the pain in my shoulder. "I'm all right. It's just a scratch. The family." "They're safe," one of the other rangers called out. He was at the door of the lookout station, talking to the shaken but unharmed family inside. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of what had just happened hit me. It was back, or maybe it had never left. And this time there were witnesses. A whole family had seen it. "We need to get everyone out of here," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now, before it comes back." Judy nodded, already on her radio calling for backup and medical support. The other rangers were helping the family out of the lookout station, keeping their rifles trained on the tree line. As we made our way back down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in those ancient redwoods, that thing was following us, waiting for another opportunity. The next few days were a blur of debriefings, medical exams, and heated arguments with park management. The family was adamant about what they'd seen, and this time there was no hiding it. Too many people had witnessed the event, had seen the creature. The park was closed indefinitely. Search teams were sent out, armed with heavy rifles and tranquilizer guns. Scientists and cryptozoologists descended on the area, eager to prove or disprove the existence of the creature. But despite all the manpower, all the technology, we found nothing, no trace of the creature. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. As for me, I was put on administrative leave. "For your own good," they said. "You need time to recover." But I knew the truth. They wanted me out of the way, wanted to control the narrative, but I couldn't let it go. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced, and I knew it was still out there, somewhere in those woods. So I did the only thing I could do. I started talking to anyone who would listen. Journalists, researchers, anyone who was willing to hear the truth about what was lurking in Redwood National Park. Most people thought I was crazy, of course. A ranger who'd cracked under the pressure, seeing monsters in the woods. But a few listened, a few believed, and as the years went by, more stories came out. More sightings, more encounters, always in the same area, always with the same description, something tall, pale, with long limbs and no eyes. The official line remained the same. A bear, they said, or a mountain lion, people's imaginations running wild. But those of us who knew, who had seen it up close, we kept searching, kept watching, because we knew the truth. There was something out there in those woods, something that didn't belong in our world, and sooner or later, it would make its presence known again. As I sit here now, years later, looking out at those towering redwoods, I can't help but wonder, how long has it been here? What does it want? And most chillingly of all, is it alone? The forest keeps its secrets well. But sometimes late at night, when the fog rolls in and the shadows grow long, I swear I can hear it. That low, guttural growl. The sound of branches breaking as something large moves through the trees. And I know deep in my bones that it's still out there, watching, waiting. This is the truth of what happened in Redwood National Park in the summer of 1983. A truth that's been buried, dismissed, and denied, but a truth nonetheless. And if you ever find yourself in those woods, walking among those ancient giants, remember this story. Keep your eyes open, your ears alert, and whatever you do, don't stray from the path, because you never know what might be watching you from the shadows of the redwoods. The story of the creature in Redwood National Park didn't end with my retirement from the Ranger Service. In fact, in many ways, that was just the beginning. Over the years, reports continued to trickle in, hikers glimpsing something pale and unnaturally tall moving through the trees, campers hearing strange sounds in the night, too low and guttural to be any known animal, park rangers finding inexplicable claw marks high up on ancient redwoods. The official stance remained unchanged. Natural explanations were given for every incident. Unusual bear activity, territorial disputes between mountain lions, the overactive imaginations of city folk unused to the deep wilderness. But those of us who knew the truth kept watching, kept documenting. We formed a loose network of believers, former rangers, researchers, cryptozoology enthusiasts. We called ourselves the Redwood Watchers. In 1995, 12 years after my first encounter, we had our biggest break yet. A wildlife photographer, setting up camera traps deep in the restricted area of the park, captured something extraordinary. The image was blurry, taken at night, but unmistakable to those of us who had seen the creature up close. That tall, pale form, those impossibly long limbs, the eyeless face turned towards the camera. The photo caused a brief media sensation. Bigfoot of the Redwoods, the tabloids called it. More serious news outlets debated the authenticity of the image. Experts were called in to analyze it, to prove or disprove its veracity. In the end, like all such incidents, it faded from public consciousness, written off as a clever hoax or a misidentified bear. But for us, it was vindication. Proof that we weren't crazy, that what we had seen was real. The years rolled on. The sightings continued, always in that same area of the park. We theorized that it was the creature's territory, a place it felt safe, protected by the ancient redwoods that had stood silent witness to its presence for who knows how long. In 2010, I received a call from Judy, my old dispatch operator. She was retiring, moving out of state to be closer to her grandkids. But before she left, she wanted to meet. Said she had something important to show me. We met at a small diner just outside the park. Judy looked older, her hair gone gray, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Without a word, she slid a file folder across the table to me. Inside was a collection of documents, old reports, stretching back to the early days of the park, sightings of a pale giant in the woods, unexplained disappearances, strange sounds recorded by early researchers. "I've been collecting these for years," Judy said, her voice low. "Anything I could find in the old archives that might be connected. Frank, this thing, whatever it is, it's been here a long time, a lot longer than we thought." I leafed through the documents, my heart racing. The earliest report was from 1882, not long after the area was first settled by European Americans. A logger's account of a white devil in the woods, towering above the men, watching them from the trees. "My God," I whispered. "Over 100 years." Judy nodded. "And those are just the written records. Who knows how long it was here before that? The local tribes, they have stories, legends, of a pale spirit that guards the ancient trees, that punishes those who disrespect the forest." We spent hours poring over the documents, piecing together a history that had been hidden, forgotten, or deliberately buried. A history of something inhuman living in the heart of the redwood forest. As I drove home that night, my mind was reeling. We had always assumed the creature was some kind of undiscovered animal species. But this suggested something else entirely, something older, something that had coexisted with humans for centuries, maybe even millennia. In the years since, I've continued my research. I've spoken with tribal elders, with old-timers whose families have lived in the area for generations. I've combed through historical records, folklore, even geological surveys of the area, and slowly a picture has begun to emerge, of an entity intrinsically tied to the redwood forest. Not an animal, not in any sense we understand, but something else. A guardian, perhaps, or a manifestation of the forest itself. The sightings continue to this day, always fleeting, always just on the edge of proof. But those of us who have seen it, who have felt its presence, we know the truth. There is something out there in the redwoods, something ancient, something powerful, something that defies our understanding of the natural world. And as long as those ancient trees stand, as long as that primeval forest endures, it will be there, watching, waiting, protecting its domain in ways we may never fully comprehend. So if you ever find yourself in Redwood National Park, walking among those towering giants, remember this story. Listen to the whispers of the wind through the branches. Watch the shadows that move in ways shadows shouldn't. And know that you are not alone in that forest, that something is watching you, something that was there long before us and will likely remain long after we're gone. This is the truth of the Redwood Watcher, a truth that spans centuries, that defies explanation, a truth that reminds us that there are still mysteries in this world, still wonders and terrors that exist beyond the edge of our understanding. And in the heart of the redwood forest, one of those mysteries still roams free. As I sit here now, an old man looking back on a lifetime of experiences, I can't help but feel a mix of awe and trepidation about what I've learned and witnessed. The creature of the redwoods has become more than just a personal encounter or a local legend. It's a testament to the enduring mysteries of our world. In recent years, as climate change and deforestation have become pressing issues, I found myself wondering about the fate of our enigmatic forest dweller. Will it adapt as its habitat changes, or is it as ancient and immutable as the redwoods themselves? I've shared my story with my grandchildren, watching their eyes widen with a mix of fear and wonder. I see in them the same curiosity that drove me all those years ago, the desire to understand the unknown. But I also see the skepticism of a new generation, raised on technology and scientific explanations. "But Grandpa," my youngest granddaughter asked me once, "if it's real, why hasn't anyone caught it on a good camera? Everyone has phones now." I smiled at her question, remembering my own doubts and frustrations over the years. "Sometimes," I told her, "the most important things in this world can't be captured on camera. They have to be experienced, felt, understood in ways that go beyond just seeing." As I approach the end of my life, I find myself drawn back to the redwoods more and more. I walk the trails I once patrolled, my old bones creaking nearly as much as the ancient trees around me. And sometimes, in the deepening twilight, I think I catch a glimpse of something pale moving through the shadows. Is it real? Is it just my aging eyes playing tricks on me? Or is it the manifestation of a lifetime spent searching for something beyond our understanding? In the end, I've come to realize that the truth of the Redwood Watcher isn't about proving its existence to the world. It's about recognizing that there are still mysteries out there, still things that defy our explanations and categorizations. It's about maintaining a sense of wonder in a world that too often seems to have lost it. So as I wrap up this account, my final testimony to the strange and wonderful thing that changed my life all those years ago, I leave you with this. The next time you find yourself in a forest, any forest, take a moment to really listen, to really look, to open yourself up to the possibility that there's more to this world than what we can easily explain or understand. Because out there, in the shadows between the trees, in the whisper of wind through ancient branches, there just might be something watching, something that reminds us of how small we are and how much wonder still exists in the world. And whether you believe in the creature of the redwoods or not, I hope you never lose that sense of wonder, because in the end, that's what makes life truly worth living. This is Frank Hawkins, former ranger of Redwood National Park, signing off. Remember, the forests are alive in more ways than we know. Treat them with respect, with awe, and with the understanding that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. And who knows, maybe someday in some dark and quiet grove, you'll have your own encounter with the unknown. And when you do, remember this old ranger's tale and know that you're not alone. Wish you a peaceful and relaxing night. Since you've made it this far, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Good night.